When you even think about somewhere like Shanghai, one of the first things that probably come to mind is, well, what's it actually going to cost me?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you've seen those amazing skyline pictures, or perhaps you're genuinely considering a job move, or maybe you're just curious about how living costs stack up globally.
Right. It's a big question.
So for this deep dive, we've been looking closely at some info provided by moveinstay.com. And these guys have been helping people find places across Asia for over 25 years now.
Yeah, that's a long time. So they've got some serious experience, especially with expats and business travelers.
Exactly. So our mission here is to kind of pull out the key financial takeaways about living in Shanghai
Hmm.
based on their insights without making your head spin with spreadsheets.
Perfect. We'll cover the big things. Housing, obviously, food, getting around, healthcare, schooling, if that's relevant for you. And yeah, even what you might spend on having some fun.
Consider it your focused guide to Shanghai's financial side.
Let's dive in. So overall costs first.
Yeah, let's start there. Moveinstay.com gives some ballpark figures. They estimate for a family of four, maybe around 27,033 RMB per month. That's Chinese yuan renminbi, by the way.
And for a single person, the estimate is closer to 17,124 RMB monthly.
But this is key. These are just estimates, right? Your actual spending could be quite different.
Oh, definitely. It totally depends on your lifestyle, how often you eat out, where you live, that kind of thing.
And they mentioned Shanghai's costs are, well, higher than many places because it's such a global financial center, right? And super popular with expats.
Exactly. That status definitely influences the prices, but it's also not, say, the most expensive city in the world across the board.
That's a good point, which leads nicely into how it compares.
Mm.
MoveInsay.com points out, compared to New York or London.
Shanghai often comes out cheaper, especially, and this is a big one, rent.
Right, rent is usually the biggest chunk. But then if you compare it to other cities in Asia,
Yeah, then the picture changes. Compared to, say, Bangkok or Ho Chi Minh City, Shanghai can look quite a bit more expensive.
so it really depends on your comparison point.
Totally. And they suggest, which is smart, using those online cost of living comparison tools if you want a really personalized look.
Good idea. So what actually makes it cost what it costs? What are the big drivers?
Well, MoveAndStay.com highlights a few key things. Location is huge. City center versus the outskirts makes a massive difference.
Okay, makes sense.
Then there's lifestyle, eating out constantly versus cooking at home, how much you travel, entertainment choices.
Right, the day-to-day stuff.
And then the type of accommodation size, quality, amenities,
Right.
and if you have kids, international school fees are a major factor.
Let's dig into housing then, because that sounds like the monster expense. MoveAndStay.com says there's a really wide range in rent.
Huge variation depends on the district, the apartment size, even how old the building is. A place with modern features near a subway stop is going to cost more.
Yeah, naturally. So what are the rough numbers they give, for a one-bedroom?
Okay, so in the city center, maybe looking at 6,000 to 10,000 RMB a month. Outside the center, it could drop to 4,000 to 7,000 RMB.
Okay. And for a bigger place, like 3 bedrooms?
In the center, again, you might be seeing 15,000 up to 30,000 RMB. Outside the center, maybe more like 10,000 to 20,000 RMB.
Wow, that's a big range, especially in the center. So proximity costs a premium.
Definitely. You're paying for convenience and location, but moving just a bit further out can mean more space for your money, or just lower costs overall. It's that trade-off.
What about actually buying a place? MoveAndStay.com makes it sound like a whole different ballgame.
It really is a massive investment, first off. Plus, they mention the market can be volatile and there are restrictions for foreigners looking to buy.
And it's expensive, right? They quoted a figure.
Yeah, the average price for residential housing sold hit around 46,000 RMB per square meter in 2023. That's significant.
Understatement. So things to consider if you were thinking buying.
Key things are eligibility, can you actually buy as a foreigner? Location, obviously. And the type of property, new build, older place, maybe even a villa further out. They really recommend getting good advice.
Makes sense. And they also touched on different districts having different vibes and costs.
Yeah, a quick rundown. Pudong, modern business district, generally higher rents. Jinan, very central, lively, lots of shopping and dining, also quite pricey.
Okay.
Jui, more residential, leafy, relaxed feel, popular with families and expats, maybe a bit more balanced cost-wise.
That sounds nice.
And then Minhang, further out, generally more affordable, quieter, a mix of residential and some industrial areas.
So choosing your neighborhood is basically choosing your budget bracket too, in a way.
Pretty much. It directly impacts your biggest monthly expense.
All right, let's switch gears to food. We all got to eat. MovieOnStay.com says cooking at home saves money, but
But it depends where you shop. Imported stuff in supermarkets will cost you more. Local markets, though, are great for fresh produce.
and you might need to haggle a bit.
Apparently so. Part of the experience. They give some example prices, too, like apples around 7.20 RMB per pound, chicken about 10.11 RMB.
Beef round was higher, around 35 RMB, and local cheese about 50 RMB per pound. But these can change, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely depends on the season and availability. Just gives you a rough idea.
And eating out sounds like there's a huge range.
Absolutely. From super cheap street food finds up to really fancy restaurants, a basic fast food meal might be around 40 RMB. Same for McDonald's meal, actually.
An inexpensive local restaurant meal, maybe 35 RMB,
Yeah.
and mid-range place for two, but 250 RMB.
Yeah, around 252.68 RMB was the figure they mentioned, so quite a jump to mid-range.
But they also highlight trying local specialties, right? Which are often cheaper.
Definitely. Things like xiaolongbao, the soup dumplings, or shengjianbao, those pan-fried buns. You can get a basket from a street vendor for maybe 20 to 30 RMB.
Oh, nice. And scallion oil noodles, Kongyu Bandian.
Even cheaper, maybe 15 to 25 RMB. So yeah, lots of delicious, affordable local options if you explore.
Okay, getting around town, public transport sounds pretty good.
Very good, actually. Extensive and efficient is how moveandstay.com describes it. The metro system is massive.
And the fares are reasonable,
Yeah.
like 3 to 9 RMB based on distance.
Exactly. Buses are even cheaper, though maybe slower with traffic. They recommend getting one of those public transportation cards.
Yeah, makes sense for convenience. What about taxis?
Available everywhere, but definitely more expensive. Starting fare around 14 RMB for the first 3 kilometers, then per kilometer charges on top. Peak hours and late nights might have surcharges too.
And ride-hailing apps, like Didi.
Very popular, often competitive with taxis, but the big caveat is traffic. Congestion can really push up the fare, whichever option you choose.
Right, the downside of a huge city. And bikes. They mentioned bike rentals.
Yeah, bike sharing is huge there.
Mm.
Super popular for shorter trips. You use an app to find and unlock a bike, ride it, and drop it off. Really cheap, like a few RMB per hour.
Sounds flexible and eco-friendly.
Totally. Great for exploring neighborhoods. Just need to be careful with traffic, and sometimes dedicated bike lanes aren't everywhere.
Okay, let's talk healthcare. This can be a tricky one. The public system.
MoveandStay.com says it's extensive, but yeah, potentially challenging for expats. Language barriers can be an issue. Waits can be long.
And you often have to pay up front.
Yeah, pay first and then figure out reimbursement if you have insurance. Quality can vary too, and you might need referrals for specialists.
So what do most expats do? Private insurance.
That seems to be the preferred route for many. It gives access to hospitals and clinics with English-speaking staff, shorter waits, often a wider network.
But it costs, obviously.
Of course. Costs vary hugely depending on the coverage, just inpatient or outpatient too, maybe dental, optical. You really need to shop around and compare policies.
MoveandStay.com gave some cost examples here too, right? Like a doctor's visit.
Uh-huh. A general consult at a public hospital might be 100-300 RMB, but a specialist at a private clinic could be 800 to 2,000 RMB, maybe more.
Wow. And an ER visit.
At a public hospital, maybe 500-1,500 RMB plus. Basic annual health insurance could run anywhere from 15,000 to 30,000 RMB or higher.
So, key advice. Understand your policy and maybe keep some cash handy for immediate payments.
Definitely wise advice.
Okay, education. For families moving with kids, this is huge. International schools.
Very expensive. MoveandStay.com puts the range at roughly 20,000 pounds to 40,000 pounds per year per child.
Ouch. That's UK pounds, so convert that.
Yeah.
A major expense. And that's just tuition.
Often, yes. There can be extra costs on top. So research is absolutely crucial.
What about local schools? Is that an option?
It is an option, but comes with challenges. The curriculum is in Chinese, instruction is in Mandarin, admission processes can be complex for non-nationals.
But could be good for immersion.
Potentially, yes. Great for language learning and cultural integration, but it requires a lot of preparation and support for the child.
And beyond tuition, there are other school costs.
For sure. MoveandStay.com lists things like tutoring, after-school activities, supplies, uniforms. It all adds up.
Good to keep in mind. All right, last big category. Entertainment and leisure. Having some fun.
Important. So costs for attractions vary. Big landmarks like the Shanghai Tower or Yu Garden might be 50 to 200 RMB entrance. Shanghai Disneyland is way more.
But there are cheaper things too. Parks, local gardens.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the propaganda poster art center was cheap.
Yeah, it was only like 30 RMB when I went. Always worth looking for those smaller, interesting places.
Good tip. And dining and nightlife, again, it's that huge range we talked about with food costs.
Right. Cheap local beers versus pricey cocktails,
Yeah.
dive bars versus fancy clubs.
Exactly. You can spend a little or a lot depending on your choices.
What about cultural stuff? Concerts, festivals?
Shanghai has a lot going on. Ticket prices really vary. Local opera might be around 100 RMB. A big international band could be 500 RMB plus easily.
So the advice is to look for deals.
Yeah, look for discounts, free events, check local listings, plan ahead. You can definitely experience the culture without always paying top dollar.
Okay, so pulling it all together, Shanghai sounds like a real mix. Some costs, especially rent in central areas and maybe international schooling, are definitely high.
For sure. But everyday things like local food, public transport, they seem quite reasonable.
So the key seems to be making smart choices.
Yeah,
Where you live, where you eat, how you get around, how you spend your free time.
precisely. Being mindful of those choices is crucial for managing a budget there. Understanding these costs up front, which is where insights from places like moveandstay.com with their, 25 plus years of experience really help. It just makes settling in so much easier.
Absolutely. Whether you're seriously thinking of moving or just like feeding your curiosity, knowing the financial landscape is step one.
It gives you a realistic picture.
Right. And thinking about moveandstay.com's long experience helping people actually live in places like Shanghai.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, beyond the money, what are some of those non-financial things someone should really consider based on all this detail about daily life?
Hmm.
It's clearly more than just the cost, isn't it?